Welcome to your quiet corner of cosmic discovery. I'm here to share something genuinely fascinating about our universe at just the right volume for drifting off. I've been thinking about how our brains seem to have this amazing radar for danger, even before we fully understand what's happening. There's something remarkable about how fear isn't just an emotion, but a whole system designed to keep us safe in ways we might not even notice. I'm really excited to share how our brains detect threats, and maybe you'll see fear in a whole new, surprisingly fascinating light tonight. Should these dreamy explorations accompany your journey to sleep, a gentle like or subscription would be deeply appreciated. What questions about our universe keep you wonderfully curious? Take this moment to settle in. Wrap yourself in comfort, release the day's weight from your shoulders, and let your breath become as gentle as starlight. Night settles softly over the world, and with it the old shroud of stories returns to drape itself across the edges of consciousness. In the gentle hush that precedes sleep, the mind is more porous, more susceptible to the whispers of ancient fears and the flickering shadows that have haunted humanity since its earliest days. Fear, that most primal of companions, is both a guardian and a tormentor, a force that has shaped not just individual lives, but entire cultures, mythologies, and the very fabric of our collective imagination. Consider the undeniable allure of a ghost story told in the dark. Across centuries and continents, people have gathered around fires, first in caves, then in huts, and now in the glowing blue haze of screens, to recount tales that quicken the pulse and send a subtle chill along the spine. There is a strange comfort in fear when it is shared, a communal reckoning with the unknown that paradoxically brings us closer together. The first storytellers, perhaps huddled against the night's cold, would have understood this instinctively. They painted shadowy figures on cave walls, carved spirits into bone, and spun narratives of monsters lurking just beyond the reach of the flame. Why do we crave these stories, which make the heart race and the breath catch? The roots reach deep, entangled in the human condition itself. Fear is the oldest language, predating speech. It is the sudden prickling on the back of the neck, the tightness in the chest when a twig snaps in the dark. Before we had words for love or hope, we had an intuitive understanding of what it meant to be afraid, and we learned early that to fear was sometimes to survive. In every culture, the transmission of fear through story became a kind of education. Myths and legends, ghost stories and campfire tales, they were the original safety manuals, encoding warnings about the dangers of the wilderness, the treachery of strangers, or the unpredictability of fate. The Greek myths, for instance, abound with monsters and vengeful gods, each one an allegory for some real or imagined peril. Medusa's petrifying gaze, the Minotaur's labyrinth, the siren's fatal song. These were not just fanciful inventions, but psychological landscapes populated by the anxieties of a people living at the mercy of the sea, the forest, and the caprice of nature. Elsewhere, the bogeymen of northern Europe, the restless dead of East Asia, the trickster spirits of Africa, all serve as mirrors reflecting the fears particular to their societies. The stories endure because they are flexible, endlessly adaptable to new times and new threats. The ghost who once haunted an abandoned house may become the spectre in a deserted subway station, the monster beneath the bed now a shadow flickering in the blue light of a smartphone. Fear is protean, always finding new forms in which to manifest. In these tales, fear is not always an enemy. Sometimes it is a tool used by parents to keep children close to home, by elders to preserve the rules of the community. The cautionary tale, "Don't stray into the woods or the Baba Yaga will catch you," is a way of encoding practical wisdom in a memorable, emotionally charged package. The more vivid the fear, the more likely the lesson will be remembered. But fear is also, undeniably, a source of pleasure. There is a curious delight in the safe thrill of a scary story, a phenomenon that has fascinated philosophers and psychologists alike. Aristotle, writing more than 2,000 years ago, pondered why people would willingly pay to watch tragic plays that left them weeping or trembling. Modern scholars have given this impulse a name: benign masochism, the enjoyment of negative emotions in controlled, non-threatening circumstances. When we watch a horror film or read a chilling ghost story, we are able to experience the rush of fear without any real danger. The body readies itself for flight or fight, heart pounding, muscles tensed, but the mind knows deep down that we are safe. The contrast is exhilarating. Few understood this dynamic better than the masters of cinematic suspense. Alfred Hitchcock, the so-called master of suspense, made an art of manipulating fear. In his films, dread is not always a matter of blood or violence, but of anticipation, suggestion, and the steady tightening of the emotional screws. Consider the infamous shower scene in Psycho. The bright, sterile bathroom is suddenly invaded by a fluttering shadow. The violins shriek, the knife gleams and falls. The editing is rapid, disorienting, a frenzy of motion that leaves the viewer gasping. Yet on close inspection, the violence is mostly implied. The blade never quite meets the flesh. The terror is conjured from suggestion, from what is glimpsed rather than seen. Hitchcock understood that the mind is an accomplice to its own terror, filling in the gaps with images far more frightening than any special effect. This strategy of suggestion is ancient. The earliest ghost stories rarely described their spirits in detail. The haunting was a presence, a whisper on the stairs, a cold breath upon the cheek. By leaving details vague, storytellers invited their listeners to project their own fears onto the narrative, making each telling a uniquely personal experience. The ghost becomes not one thing, but many, the embodiment of whatever frightens the listener most. If Hitchcock played with anticipation, Ridley Scott, in his 1979 film Alien, explored the power of silence and the terror of the unknown. In space, so the tagline reminds us, no one can hear you scream. The film's setting, a cramped, labyrinthine spaceship surrounded by infinite darkness, triggers a special kind of fear, the terror of isolation, of being trapped with no hope of escape. The alien itself, glimpsed only in fragments, is a monster born from the deepest recesses of the imagination. Its very biology is a violation of natural order. Insectile, serpentine, dripping with acid, it is both familiar and utterly foreign. Scott's genius lies in his use of sound, or rather the lack of it. The silences in Alien are as oppressive as the shrieks. Each footstep, each hiss of machinery is magnified against the void. When danger finally erupts, it is all the more shocking for the quiet that preceded it. The ghost stories of old, like the science fiction horrors of today, feed on the same psychological roots. The fear of the unknown, the dark, the unseeable, the incomprehensible, remains as potent now as it was for our ancestors. As technology has advanced, so too have our monsters. The vampire and werewolf give way to the serial killer, the haunted house to the haunted computer, the lurking beast to the all-seeing artificial intelligence. But the emotional architecture of fear remains remarkably unchanged. Pop culture, with its endless appetite for novelty, has proved to be an ideal incubator for new expressions of fear. Horror films, haunted attractions, urban legends spread by the viral tendrils of the internet. Each generation invents its own monsters, tailored to the anxieties of the age. Consider the rise of found footage horror, from the Blair Witch Project to Paranormal Activity, which trades on the illusion of reality, the shaky camera, the muffled voices, the sense of amateurish authenticity. These are the trappings of a world where truth itself feels unstable, where anyone can capture terror on a smartphone and broadcast it to the world. This blending of fiction and reality is not new, but it has become more pervasive. The line between the tale and the experience blurs. Once people might have gathered to hear a storyteller recount an encounter with a ghost. Now they scroll through forums filled with true accounts of the supernatural, each more chilling for its claim to authenticity. The rituals remain, the darkened room, the hush, the prickle of anticipation. Only the medium has changed. At the heart of these narratives is a paradox. We seek fear, even as we recoil from it. We watch the slasher film with hands half covering our eyes. We read ghost stories late into the night, even as every creak and groan in the house takes on a new and sinister meaning. There is a pleasure in fear, but only when we are able to keep it at arm's length, to remind ourselves that the monster is confined to the screen, the spectre to the page. Yet sometimes the boundary slips and fear leaks into waking life. The power of a story is such that it can linger long after the telling, colouring the shadows and lending the ordinary world a hint of menace. A child who has heard a tale of ghosts may lie awake, staring into the darkness, convinced that something stirs just beyond sight. Even adults, their rational minds fortified against superstition, may find themselves hesitating at the foot of an unlit staircase, heart quickening in the silence. The persistence of these sensations hints at something deeper than mere entertainment. Fear is not just a reflex, but a way of engaging with the mysteries of existence. It is the shadow twin of curiosity, propelling us to explore the forbidden, to peer into the darkness, to seek out the secrets that lie hidden at the edge of understanding. The stories we tell about ghosts and monsters, about killers lurking in the night, or aliens prowling in the void, are ways of mapping the unknown, giving shape and form to the anxieties that haunt us. In this sense, fear is a creative force. The tales that frighten us most are often those that tap into the ambiguities and uncertainties of our lives. The haunted house is never just a building, it is a metaphor for all that is unresolved or repressed. The monster is never just a beast, it is the embodiment of forbidden desires or unspoken traumas. Even the silent vacuum of space, as in Alien, becomes a canvas on which to project our dread of isolation, insignificance, and the vastness of the cosmos. Each new era brings its own fears, and with them, new stories. The Gothic novels of the 19th century, with their crumbling castles and spectral apparitions, gave way to the urban legends of the 20th, the slasher films, and the psychological thrillers. In the 21st century, fear is increasingly digital. Viral videos, AI-generated horrors, deepfakes, and online hauntings. Yet the structure of the stories remains the same, echoing the patterns laid down by our distant ancestors. It is tempting, in the safety of the present, to dismiss the ghosts of the past as relics, the monsters as mere superstitions. But to do so is to misunderstand the nature of fear. These stories endure not because we believe in them literally, but because they speak to something fundamental in the human psyche. They are the echoes of ancient anxieties refracted through the lens of culture and technology. As you lie in darkness, listening to the soft hum of the world settling into sleep, you may feel the faintest stirrings of those old, familiar fears. The creak of a floorboard, a whisper of wind at the window, the flicker of shadow on the ceiling, all become charged with meaning, with the possibility of presence. The stories linger, not just as entertainment, but as a way of making sense of the uncertainties that surround us. In the hush before sleep, when the mind is most receptive, the origins of fear reveal themselves, not as a weakness, but as a kind of wisdom, a recognition of the unknown that still waits to be understood. The stories we tell and the fears they evoke are the maps by which we navigate the darkness. And as the night deepens, the next chapter beckons, promising a journey not just into the shadows, but into the very heart of what it means to feel afraid. Beneath the sheltering boughs of some ancient imagined forest, where the moonlight is laced with fog and the air is thick with the scent of moss and earth, the human mind becomes a landscape as intricate as the woods themselves. In this dark forest, both literal and metaphorical. Our ancestors listened for the subtle crack of twigs, the hush of unseen movement, the distant howl of a predator. Their survival depended on a suite of neural mechanisms honed over millions of years that could transform the quietest rustle into a thundering command for vigilance or escape. Tonight, let us wander through this inner darkness, tracing the tangled roots and hidden pathways of our brain's response to threat. Here, in the silent shadows, lies the birth of fear and the origins of courage, both more complex and more entwined than common tales would have us believe. To begin, we must attend to the amygdala, a pair of almond-shaped clusters deep within the temporal lobes. The amygdala is often named the sentinel of fear, the watchman perched atop the walls of the mind. Its structure is ancient, shared with distant mammalian cousins, and even with creatures more primitive still. When danger is near, or even when danger is merely imagined, the amygdala is among the first to stir. Imagine a hiker moving quietly through the undergrowth when suddenly a snake, coiled and silent, comes into view. A flicker of movement, a glint of scales, and in an instant the amygdala lights up. This activation is not a gentle nudge, but a flare sent up to the rest of the brain and body. Within milliseconds, signals race down neural highways, converging on the hypothalamus, which in turn activates the pituitary gland and the adrenal medulla. The result is a flood of hormones, adrenaline, cortisol, the messengers of urgency and arousal. The body changes as if by magic. Heart rate accelerates, pumping blood to the muscles. Pupils dilate, pulling more light into the eyes. Breath comes faster, drawing in oxygen for action. Even the hairs on the arms may stand erect, an echo of our furred ancestors whose bristling coats made them look larger to would-be attackers. This is the fight or flight response, primal, automatic, and breathtakingly swift. But here, in the heart of the forest, it is worth pausing. The popular story is that this response is binary, fight or flight, a forked path, one direction or the other. Yet the truth is more nuanced. Biologists have come to recognize a broader spectrum of defensive behaviors. Sometimes freezing is the best option, remaining perfectly still, muscles taut, breath held, hoping to avoid detection. At other times, the best hope is not to fight or flee, but to appease, to submit, or even to call for help. The brain does not simply flip a switch. It weighs context, history, and possibility, drawing from a deep well of experience and instinct. The amygdala, for all its importance, is not a lonely actor upon the stage. It is embedded in a network, communicating with the hippocampus, which records the memory of the event, where the threat was, what it looked like, how it felt. The prefrontal cortex, seat of reasoning and reflection, is also involved, especially when time allows for deliberation. In dangerous moments, the prefrontal cortex may take a back seat, overridden by the amygdala's insistence on immediate action. Yet in quieter times, it can reinterpret, reframe, and even soothe the alarms sounded by older, deeper parts of the brain. The interplay between these regions can be both a blessing and a curse. Consider the phenomenon of learned fear. A child bitten by a dog may develop a lasting fear, not only of that particular animal, but of dogs in general, or even of parks where dogs are known to roam. The amygdala and hippocampus conspire to create associations that are, from an evolutionary perspective, protective. But these associations can grow overbroad, spilling into anxiety, phobia, and avoidance that limit the richness of life. Conversely, the prefrontal cortex can help us unlearn fear. Through experience, reflection, or therapy, we may come to see that not all dogs are dangerous, that the dark is not always full of monsters, that the world, while unpredictable, is not always bent on harm. This process, called extinction learning, is not the erasure of fear, but its quiet transformation, a dwindling of threat where once it loomed large. And yet, for all our advances in neuroscience, the dark forest of fear remains only partially mapped. The amygdala, for instance, is not only the seat of fear. It is also involved in other emotions, anger, excitement, even pleasure. Its subdivisions are still being teased apart by careful experiment and imaging. Meanwhile, other brain regions, the bed nucleus of the stria terminalis, the insula, the cingulate cortex, each play their own subtle roles, modulating the quality and intensity of our emotional responses. The dance is intricate, unpredictable, and ever-changing. There are myths here too, woven into the underbrush. One of the most persistent is the notion that courage is the absence of fear. But this is a simplification, a shimmering illusion. True courage, as any seasoned explorer of the mind will tell you, is not the lack of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. In the brain, this means that the amygdala's alarms may blare, but the prefrontal cortex, drawing on memory, purpose, and values, helps to chart a course through the noise. The neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux, whose research has illuminated the workings of the amygdala, has argued that much of what we call fear in animals is more accurately described as defensive behavior. The subjective feeling of fear, what it is actually like to be afraid, is something layered atop these ancient circuits, a product of the brain's ability to represent and reflect on its own states. Thus a mouse may freeze when it detects a shadow overhead, but we cannot know if it feels fear as we do. What we experience as terror, dread, or anxiety is shaped not only by reflex and instinct, but by thought and imagination. This leads to another surprising truth. The same machinery that protects us can also betray us. The amygdala cannot distinguish between real and imagined threats with perfect accuracy. A looming shadow in the forest triggers the same cascade as a troubling memory, an anxious thought, or a nightmare. The result is that we sometimes suffer twice, once in reality and again in anticipation. The prefrontal cortex, for all its sophistication, is not immune to the power of ancient fears. Yet fear, for all its discomfort, is not merely an enemy. It is a guide, a teacher, a painter of boundaries. People who are born without a functioning amygdala, a rare condition known as Urbach-Wiener disease, often exhibit reckless behavior, unable to feel or respond appropriately to danger. Their lives are marked not by freedom, but by risk and vulnerability. Fear, it seems, is necessary for survival, for wisdom, even for compassion. But too much fear can be paralyzing. Anxiety disorders, phobias, panic disorder, post-traumatic stress are the shadows cast when the brain's alarm systems are stuck in overdrive. Here, the circuitry that once helped our ancestors survive becomes a source of suffering. The fear of public speaking, for instance, is not so different in its neural signature from the fear of snakes or darkness. The brain cannot always tell the difference between physical and social threats. The heart pounds, the mouth dries, the mind races, all at the mere thought of stepping into a room full of strangers. Still, the story does not end there. The brain is plastic, capable of change and adaptation. With practice, exposure, and support, new pathways can be forged. The amygdala's signals can be tempered, the prefrontal cortex strengthened, the hippocampus enlisted in the service of hope rather than dread. This is the essence of resilience, not the absence of fear, but the capacity to move forward even when afraid. It is also worth noting that fear can sharpen the senses, focusing attention and boosting memory. Soldiers, athletes, and performers often describe a state of heightened awareness in moments of peril or challenge. The world seems brighter, more vivid, etched in sharper relief. This is not a trick of the mind, but a result of the same hormones and neural circuits that drive the fight or flight response. In the right measure, fear is not a foe, but a force, awakening resources we did not know we possessed. There are, of course, cultural dimensions to fear as well. What one society dreads, another may embrace. What is taboo in one era may be celebrated in another. The stories we tell of heroes, monsters, and haunted woods both reflect and shape the contours of our collective anxieties. The brain's response to threat is, in this sense, both universal and uniquely personal, a dance between biology and story, instinct and imagination. As we move further into the dark forest, it becomes clear that the line between fear and courage, between help and hindrance, is not fixed but fluid. The same circuits that send us running from danger can also spur us to acts of kindness, creativity, and daring. The amygdala, so often maligned as the source of panic and terror, is also a sentinel for wonder, a part of the brain that responds not only to threat, but to novelty, uncertainty, and possibility. Some neuroscientists have begun to speculate that the very same systems that generate fear are also involved in curiosity. The crackling of a twig in the night, the flicker of movement at the edge of vision, these may trigger vigilance, but also fascination. There is a thin line between the shiver of dread and the thrill of discovery. The dark forest, after all, is not only a place of danger, but of mystery and potential. And so, as we drift through these neural thickets, it is worth remembering that fear is not an aberration, but a fundamental part of what it means to be alive. It is the lantern that lights the shadows, the pulse that quickens at the opening of an unseen path. To understand the brain's response to threat is not to banish fear, but to learn how to walk with it, sometimes warily, sometimes boldly, always with the knowledge that the dark forest is both a place of peril and a source of wisdom. The path ahead grows fainter, the trees crowding close, as if guarding secrets still deeper in the night. If the amygdala is the sentinel, what of the other forces that shape our journey through fear? What happens when the alarms persist long after the danger has passed, or when the boundaries between real and imagined threat begin to blur? The forest holds more questions than answers, and the story of fear, courage, and the brain is far from complete. In the gathering dusk, we press on, listening for the next whisper in the undergrowth, the next clue hidden in the patterns of the mind. As dusk settles and the world slips into the hush of evening, let us quietly open the doors to the laboratories and minds where the puzzle of fear has been patiently, meticulously dissected. Though dread is as old as life itself, the quest to measure and understand it is a story of ingenuity, adaptation, and the ever-deepening dance between the tools we invent and the mysteries we seek to pierce. Tonight we wander through this story, from candle-lit rooms where the first flickers of psychological inquiry began, to the humming, softly glowing sanctuaries of modern neuroscience, where the architecture of terror is mapped in living brains. Imagine, for a moment, a small office in late 19th century Leipzig. Here, Wilhelm Wundt sits at his desk, pencil in hand, the air thick with the seriousness of his experiment. The tools are simple: a metronome, a chronoscope, perhaps a bell. Volunteers, perhaps students eager to contribute to the new science of the mind, are asked to describe their feelings and thoughts as they listen to sounds or gaze at colored lights. Wundt's method, called introspection, is delicate and deeply personal. To examine fear, he asks his subjects to peer inward, to capture and articulate the fleeting, shadowy contours of their inner experience. But introspection, though poetic, is slippery. The language of fear is easily tangled by memory, pride, or the simple inability to name what we feel. As psychology grows, so too does the hunger for tools that are less vulnerable to the whims of self-reporting. By the early 20th century, the torch passes to figures like John B. Watson. In a stark, white-walled room, Watson and his assistant, Rosalie Rayner, conduct what would become one of the most infamous experiments in the annals of psychology. They present a small child, the now legendary little Albert, with a gentle white rat. At first, the child reaches out without fear. But then, each time Albert touches the rat, Watson strikes a steel bar with a hammer, filling the room with a sudden, jarring clang. The child flinches, cries, recoils. Soon, the sight of the rat alone is enough to summon terror. Watson's approach is radically different. He does not ask the child to describe his experience. Instead, he watches for observable behaviors: startle, withdrawal, tears. Fear, in this new behavioral paradigm, is measured by what can be seen and counted. The laboratory becomes a stage, the scientist a watchful audience, and the subject's body, the trembling hands, the widened eyes, a canvas on which dread paints its signals. Of course, the ethical tides shift. The suffering of little Albert and countless animals in fear conditioning experiments leads, over decades, to the development of strict protocols. Yet the principle remains. Fear, elusive in words, often reveals itself in the body. This insight is the seed from which a garden of ingenious techniques will bloom. One of the earliest and most enduring tools for dissecting fear is the measurement of the startle reflex. Picture a subject quietly seated in a dim room. Without warning, a sudden burst of noise, a sharp, brief tone, erupts from hidden speakers. Almost invariably, the subject blinks, shoulders jerk upward, perhaps a small gasp escapes. This reflex, ancient and automatic, is a window into the nervous system's preparedness for threat. Researchers, with electrodes delicately placed around the eyes, record the magnitude and speed of the blinks. They discover that startle is magnified when a person is anxious or when they anticipate something unpleasant. In the laboratory, startle becomes a reliable yardstick for fear's presence and intensity. Yet, the body offers other clues as well. The skin, for example, responds to fear with a subtle shimmer. When threatened, the sweat glands, especially on the palms, become more active, making the skin a better conductor of electricity. This is the principle behind galvanic skin response, or electrodermal activity. Researchers gently attach electrodes to a subject's fingers, sending a tiny, harmless current through the skin. As fear rises, so does the conductance, tracing a silent arc on a strip of moving paper or a digital screen. The skin, it seems, is a silent witness to the dramas of the mind. The heart, too, betrays its secrets. Electrocardiograms capture the quickening pace of the heart when we are startled or anxious. Blood pressure cuffs, pulse oximeters, and respiration belts complete the physiology's chorus, each measure a verse in the song of fear. Together, these techniques allow scientists to build a composite portrait, not of what fear feels like, but of how it reverberates through flesh and bone. As the 20th century unfolds, the toolbox expands. Behavioral experiments, many inspired by the pioneering work of Ivan Pavlov and his dogs, grow more sophisticated. In one such paradigm, known as classical fear conditioning, a neutral stimulus, a tone, a shape, a light, is paired with an aversive event, like a mild electric shock or a puff of air. Over repeated trials, the subject begins to respond to the once innocent cue as if it were dangerous. The beauty of this approach lies in its precision. The intensity of the fear response can be measured trial by trial, and the process of extinction, when the cue is presented without the threat, can be just as carefully tracked. In animals, these experiments take on an almost ritualistic regularity. A rat, placed in a small chamber, hears a tone, then feels a brief, harmless but startling shock to its feet. The next time it hears the tone, it freezes, muscles locked, motionless, as if turning to stone. Freezing is a primal defense, a bet that stillness will allow the creature to go unnoticed by predators. By carefully measuring the duration and frequency of freezing, researchers can quantify fear itself, charting the learning and unlearning of terror. Yet, as powerful as these methods are, they remain indirect. They reveal the tracks of fear as it moves through the body, but not the machinery that generates those tracks. The question begins to shift. What is happening in the brain during these moments of dread? How is fear constructed, coordinated, and expressed by the neural circuits within our skulls? The answer to this question requires a new generation of tools, ones that can peer directly into the living brain. The first glimpses come through the eyes of neurosurgeons and neurologists. In the middle of the 20th century, the pioneering Canadian neurosurgeon Wilder Penfield begins to map the brain's terrain with an electrified probe. His patients, awake during surgery, report flashes of memory, bursts of emotion, even sudden waves of unease as different regions are stimulated. It becomes clear that certain areas, the amygdala, the hippocampus, the hypothalamus, play central roles in the orchestration of fear. But these sightings are fleeting, anecdotal, and limited to the rare cases where the living brain can be touched. The dream of a true cartography of fear will have to wait for the arrival of neuroimaging. In the waning decades of the 20th century, this dream comes alive. A suite of new technologies, each more enchanting than the last, emerges to illuminate the brain's hidden activities. Positron emission tomography, or PET, is among the first. It works on a deceptively simple principle. By injecting a small amount of radioactive tracer into the bloodstream, scientists can watch as active brain regions take up more of the tracer, glowing softly in the scanner's eye. When subjects are shown threatening faces or asked to recall frightening memories, the amygdala lights up like a lantern in the night. Soon after, magnetic resonance imaging, MRI, and its dynamic cousin, functional MRI, fMRI, revolutionize the field. Unlike PET, which requires radioactive tracers, fMRI is non-invasive and can track brain activity in near real time. It does so by detecting subtle changes in blood flow. When neurons fire, they consume more oxygen, and the scanner, humming quietly, can sense the resulting shifts in magnetism. With fMRI, researchers can watch as fear unfolds second by second, tracing the intricate choreography of circuits that link the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, and the insula. Within these glowing images, a new language emerges. The amygdala, deep in the temporal lobe, is revealed as a sentinel, responding rapidly and automatically to fearful stimuli, even before conscious awareness. The prefrontal cortex, seat of planning and reflection, weighs and modulates these responses, sometimes amplifying, sometimes quieting the storm. The hippocampus, keeper of context and memory, helps us remember where danger lurks and when it is safe to relax. The insula, folded deep within the cerebral cortex, translates bodily sensations, racing heart, shallow breath, into subjective feelings of anxiety. With these tools, scientists can ask questions never before possible. How does the brain respond to ambiguous threats, like a shadowy shape in the dark? What happens when fear becomes pathological, as in phobias or post-traumatic stress disorder? By comparing the brains of those who suffer from these conditions to those who do not, researchers begin to unravel the neural signatures of chronic dread. Sometimes they find that the amygdala is hyperactive, firing at the faintest hint of danger. Other times the prefrontal cortex seems unable to tamp down runaway alarms. Slowly, the portrait of fear's neural machinery comes into focus, not as a single center, but as a dynamic network, shaped by genes, experience, and even culture. But neuroimaging is only one thread in the tapestry. The brain is not merely a collection of glowing regions, it is a humming electrical machine. To capture the brain's electrical symphony, researchers turn to electroencephalography, or EEG. In this technique, a cap of electrodes is placed gently on the scalp, recording the faint electrical signals generated by millions of neurons firing in synchrony. The signals, displayed as undulating waves on a screen, can be analyzed for specific rhythms and patterns. Certain brainwave frequencies become more prominent during fear and anxiety, offering a real-time glimpse into the brain's arousal state. For even greater precision, scientists sometimes use invasive electrodes implanted directly into the brains of animals. and, in rare medical cases, humans. Single neurons can be monitored as they whisper and shout, responding to specific sights, sounds, or memories of threat. These recordings, painstaking and precise, have revealed remarkable things, that some neurons in the amygdala are tuned to very specific types of fear, a slithering snake, a looming face, a sudden sound, while others respond more generally, signaling arousal or vigilance. Meanwhile, behavioral experiments continue to evolve in their sophistication. Virtual reality, once the stuff of science fiction, now allows researchers to immerse subjects in simulated worlds of threat and safety. Volunteers may find themselves standing on the edge of a virtual cliff, pursued by digital predators, or navigating a labyrinthine cityscape at night. In these controlled yet realistic environments, the subtleties of human fear can be studied without exposing anyone to real harm. Researchers track not only physiological responses, but also eye movements, reaction times, and even subtle shifts in posture, all clues to the workings of dread. Genetics too enters the stage. By studying twins, families, and populations, scientists uncover the heritability of fear. They identify genes that influence the sensitivity of neurotransmitter systems, the development of the amygdala, the resilience of the prefrontal cortex. In animals, they can even manipulate genes to produce mice that are unusually fearless or especially anxious, opening new windows into the molecular roots of dread. Yet, for all these dazzling tools, the study of fear remains grounded in a simple truth. The best experiments are those that respect the complexity of the subject. Fear is not merely a reflex, nor just a pattern of neural firing. It is a lived, embodied experience, shaped by our histories, our cultures, and our imaginations. Good scientists are careful not to reduce terror to a number or a glowing spot on an image. They remember that behind every blink, every bead of sweat, every fearful freeze, there is a consciousness, alert, vulnerable, and achingly alive. So, as we drift deeper into this night, we find ourselves surrounded by the instruments and methods that have illuminated fear, each one a lens through which the old mystery is refracted anew. The story is not yet finished. For all our progress, questions remain, shimmering on the horizon. What is it, finally, that transforms a fleeting scare into a lifelong shadow? How do the tools of science shape and sometimes limit what we can know about fear? And where might the next breakthroughs come from, deeper within the brain, or perhaps within the silent spaces between experiment and experience? Beyond the glow of scanners and the hum of computers, the night stretches on, inviting us to rest and to wonder what else awaits just beyond the edge of knowing. From the first flickering moments of our lives, fear lies in wait, not as an enemy, but as a silent companion. In the earliest glimmers of consciousness, when an infant startles at a loud noise or recoils from a shadow crossing the crib, fear is there, wordless, primal, shaping the opening chapters of experience. As we grow, it matures alongside us, sometimes veiled in the background, sometimes exploding in the foreground with the force of a thunderclap. Fear is not merely an emotion that haunts the margins of our awareness. It is woven into the very architecture of our being, a force both ancient and immediate, moulding the boundaries of what we dare and what we avoid, what we cherish and what we grieve. Consider the ways, subtle and overt, in which fear guides our decisions. It is easy to imagine fear as a simple warning system, a flashing signal when danger approaches, a tightening in the chest when we sense something amiss. Yet in truth, fear is a master sculptor, chiseling the contours of our lives with hands both gentle and severe. It urges us to pause at the edge of a precipice, to weigh our words before speaking in a crowded room, to double-check the locks on our doors as darkness settles outside. Each of these small hesitations, these quiet recalibrations, are gifts of survival, inherited from ancestors who listened to their trepidations and endured. But fear is not always so clear-eyed or benevolent. Sometimes it is a trickster, conjuring threats where none exist, inflating the unknown into a looming spectre. The amygdala, that almond-shaped kernel deep within our brains, cannot always distinguish between the snarl of a predator and the imagined dangers of social embarrassment, or the gnawing uncertainty that comes with change. Thus, fear becomes both a shield and a shackle, a force that protects but also limits, casting long shadows across the landscapes of possibility. To understand the full measure of fear's role in human life, we must look beyond the biochemistry of neurotransmitters and the circuitry of neural pathways. We must ask, what does it mean to be afraid? What does fear reveal about the nature of existence, and what does it conceal? These questions invite us to peer into the deeper waters, where science and philosophy mingle, and where fear transforms from a mere reaction to a profound lens through which to view the world. In the natural world, fear's purpose is unambiguous. It is the pulse that sends the gazelle leaping from the grass as the lion approaches, the shiver that warns a bird to still its song when a shadow passes overhead. This raw, immediate fear is the currency of survival, the difference between life and death in countless encounters played out across eons. In humans, too, this ancient circuitry persists. The surge of adrenaline, the narrowing of attention, the quickening of the heart, these are vestiges of a time when the world was a wilder, more perilous place. Yet even as civilization has softened the edges of daily danger, fear has not retreated. Instead, it has adapted, finding new forms and new objects. We fear failure and rejection, loss and loneliness, the slow erosion of time and the abrupt arrival of catastrophe. We fear not only what is, but what might be, the endless cascade of possibilities that the future holds. This capacity to imagine dangers not present, to anticipate outcomes that may never come to pass, is the double-edged sword of consciousness. It allows for planning, for caution, for the kind of foresight that builds cities and writes laws. But it also seeds anxiety, dread, and the paralyzing uncertainty that can haunt even the most secure existence. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard wrote of angst, a special kind of fear, not of any particular thing, but of the sheer potentiality of being. This existential dread arises when we confront the open-endedness of life, the vertigo of freedom, the fact that at any moment we stand at the crossroads of infinite possible choices. Unlike the fear that startles us into action, existential angst is a slow, persistent ache, a background hum that asks, what if? What if I choose wrongly? What if nothing matters? What if the world is not as I hope? This form of fear is not a flaw, but a testament to our self-awareness. To be conscious is to know that we exist, and to know that we exist is to sense, however faintly, the possibility of non-existence. This is the shadow that follows every step, the silent echo of mortality that gives urgency to our days and poignancy to our joys. In this sense, fear is not merely a response to danger, but a recognition of our finitude, a quiet reminder that our time is brief, and that every choice we make carves a unique path through the uncharted wilderness of possibility. And yet, fear does not only isolate, it also connects. Across cultures and centuries, the stories we tell are braided with fear. Myths of monsters lurking in the night, cautionary tales whispered by firelight, legends of heroes who face terrors and emerge changed. These are not simply entertainments, but communal rehearsals for the dangers we all face. In sharing our fears, we find solidarity, the tremor in the voice of another, the widened eyes, the held breath. These are signals of kinship, reminders that we are not alone in our vulnerability. In the rituals of childhood, huddling beneath blankets during a thunderstorm, clutching a parent's hand in a darkened theater, daring a friend to peek into a shadowy attic, we learn together to face what frightens us. The communal experience of fear becomes a forge for trust and intimacy, a way to test the boundaries of courage and to discover, in the process, the resilience that lies hidden within. There is also a paradoxical allure to fear. Think of the thrill-seekers who scale sheer cliffs, the readers who devour tales of terror, the audiences who flock to horror films. Here, fear is sought out, cultivated, even savoured, a spice that sharpens the senses and electrifies the imagination. Why do we court fright when so much of life is spent fleeing it? Perhaps it is because, in these controlled doses, fear teaches us something vital. It reveals the contours of our own limits, the shape of our courage, the depth of our endurance. In the safe embrace of story or spectacle, we rehearse the dramas of survival, learning to navigate the currents of emotion that otherwise might overwhelm us. Yet the landscape of fear is not always so easily mapped. Some fears are diffuse, nameless, as insidious as mist. The fear of the unknown, that ancient and persistent thread, winds through every age and culture. It is the fear that lurks in the spaces between knowledge, in the unanswered questions, in the silence at the end of understanding. For early humans, the unknown was the dark outside the fire's circle, the rustle in the tall grass, the storm on the horizon. Today, the unknown is no less vast. It is the future of a changing climate, the inscrutable logic of disease, the mysteries of consciousness and death, the ever-advancing frontiers of technology. This fear of what lies beyond our grasp is both a source of anxiety and a wellspring of curiosity. It is the engine that drives inquiry, the provocation for science and art alike. Without the sting of uncertainty, the hunger to know, the ache of not knowing, we might never venture beyond the familiar. Fear, in this sense, is not only a brake, but a catalyst, a force that propels us outward into new realms of thought and experience. Philosophers have long debated the meaning of fear, its value and its dangers. Some, like the Stoics of ancient Greece, counseled that fear is an error of judgment, a distortion of reason, best conquered by discipline and detachment. Others, like Nietzsche, saw in fear a necessary crucible, the fire in which the self is tempered and transformed. In modern psychology, fear is understood as both a pathology and a potential, a force that can disable, but also a source of insight and growth. The challenge, perhaps, is not to eliminate fear, but to learn its language, to listen to its messages, to distinguish the warnings that guard us from the illusions that bind us. In the intimate theatre of the mind, fear often masquerades in many forms. It may appear as caution, as prudence, as humility before the vastness of the world. At other times it swells into anxiety, paranoia, or despair. The task of living for each of us is to navigate this shifting terrain, to recognize when fear is a friend and when it is a foe. Consider the moments when fear holds us back from what we desire, a dream deferred, a love left unspoken, a voyage never taken. In such cases, fear is a prison, narrowing the aperture of possibility, dimming the light of potential. Yet there are moments, too, when fear is the crucible of transformation. The trembling before a leap, the quickening before a confession, the dread before a necessary ending, these are the thresholds where life expands, where the old is left behind, and something new is born. In the grand tapestry of human experience, fear is a thread that runs through every life, every age, every story, told and untold. It is the shadow at the edge of the campfire, the chill in the marrow, the question that lingers when the answers fall silent. To be human is to dwell in the tension between safety and risk, comfort and adventure, knowing and not knowing. Fear is the measure of what we value, the life we wish to preserve, the people we long to protect, the dreams we hope to realize. There is a certain humility in acknowledging the place of fear in our lives. It reminds us that we are not omnipotent, not immune to harm, not masters of every fate. But in this humility lies a paradoxical strength. To admit fear is to admit care, to recognize the fragility of what matters most, and in doing so, to honor it. The parent who fears for a child's safety, the artist who fears failure, the traveler who fears the unknown, each is, in some way, expressing love, hope, longing. Fear, then, is not the opposite of courage, but its companion. The brave are not those who feel no fear, but those who move forward despite it, who listen to its counsel without succumbing to its tyranny. In this dance between trepidation and daring, between retreat and advance, we discover the full measure of our humanity. As the night deepens and the world outside sinks into silence, fear itself softens, settling into the background hum of being. It is the gentle tug that reminds us to cherish what we have, to hold close what we love, to greet the unknown with trembling curiosity rather than blind dread. In the end, fear is not an aberration to be eradicated, but a shadow to be understood, a companion on the journey, a teacher in the darkness, a witness to the fragile, luminous miracle of being alive. Beyond the hush of the present moment, there waits another day, filled with new choices, new uncertainties, new encounters with the unknown. The path ahead is always partly veiled, the future a tapestry yet unspooled, the shadows ever shifting at the margins of sight. And still we move forward, guided by the quiet wisdom of our fears, and by the hope that somewhere in the darkness a new understanding awaits its hour. As our journey through the delicate dance of fear drifts to a close, like a comet tail fading into the hush of space, may your mind find calm among the stars. Rest peacefully beneath the gentle glow of understanding, and when the night calls you back, we'll explore more mysteries together in the quiet wonder of Dreamtime Science.